So today we are on session 5, and we're going to be talking about debt and the strategic use of debt to build wealth. So like everything that we do with leadership, global or with wealth mastery or with WOW, we're really inviting a different way of thinking about pretty much everything related to finances and wealth building, and debt being probably one of the biggest ones that is misunderstood and misused. So I'm really excited to get into this today. So Jennifer, I'll let you take some of the definitions.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll start by how we probably all knee jerk into thinking about debt, right? If you look it up, you can see there are definitions that would correlate with that sort of knee-jerk response. I think so many of us have Pavlovian sort of response to what is debt. And it comes from sort of a negative place, like, oh, it's something I owe to somebody. It's something heavy. He was unable to pay off his debts, right? Or you're in kind of almost somebody's got some power over you, right? And a state of obligation in exchange for something being received, a state of owing. And we typically think of it as being in debt, right? As a state and not an active kind of verb, let's say. And so there are other definitions of debt too. And if we go to the next slide, we can start understanding the fundamentals from an economic principle of what debt actually is, okay? And what it really is credit, a positive, not necessarily a negative. Now, this is all with the asterisk that, of course, misuse of debt and irresponsible use of your finances or money, we're talking about, that's a given. We all understand that women are actually statistically excellent with money and with debt. So let's just take as a baseline that we're kind of responsible about paying back what we've borrowed. Let's just take that as a baseline, okay? But now let's reframe it into the definitions that are also available for what is debt. And it can be a balance. So see, again, that's something positive, a balance in favor, right, on an account, an amount or some place at a person's disposal. So look at the freedom there, the disposal you have because something has been credited to you via debt, and a provision of money, goods, or services with an expectation of future payment. Yes, of course. And again, women are statistically, the World Bank discovered this. They were doing microloans in Africa, and they were doing it to both men and women. And they discovered that the women would borrow $10, come back next week, pay that the interest, and ask to borrow 20 because they'd started a small business and they were starting to thrive. And often the men would go gamble it and lose it and not come up. So they started just doing microloans to women. Statistics don't lie, okay? So with all that in mind, you can start reframing debt as credit and as a verb, a subjunctive verb, I guess, the ability to borrow money with the promise that you'll repay it in the future, often with interest. Now, do you want to talk about this one, Aditya?
Yeah, I can take the next couple of slides. So this is just like a really quick, how does credit work? I think most of us know how it works, but this is an important kind of mechanism to get us in the mindset here. So credit essentially is we apply for credit. So whether that's a credit card or a loan, basically the amount that we need or we want access to use. And this access piece is relevant when it comes to revolving credit, like credit cards or lines of credit. The financial institution doesn't necessarily have to be a bank, but basically the lender will approve you based on your credit worthiness. So that is your credit score. The interest rate is assessed and a repayment term is set up. So we know if we take out a loan, it's going to be a 5-year loan. Let's say it's going to be at a 3% fixed interest rate and monthly payments are going to be X amount based on a mathematical calculation. We can call it $270. I'm not sure. Then that repayment plan is agreed upon. It could be monthly, it could be annually, it could be interest only, it could be amortizing. These are all just terms that I'm going to throw out there, and they're important, and we're going to get to this later. These are all really important terms to understand because understanding the structure of your debt allows you to use it as a tool instead of feeling that sense of obligation and kind of fear with debt, which is something that that comes up a lot. So then once you're approved, your credit or your loan is made available to you, and then you can use it And then the amount that you use, so if you take out a loan, that whole amount is debt. You're in debt to the creditor that gave you the money. If it's a credit card, then it's revolving and you can use it up to the amount that has been allocated to you. And so one quick thing, we're not going to spend a lot of time on credit score, but having good credit makes it easier to do so many things. It's part of our financial system. It's like a grading of how creditworthy we are. So what that really means is how big of a risk are we to a lender? Because a lender essentially is thinking, I'm going to make money by lending. That's the mechanism. And I want to make sure that I can be paid back. And so creditworthiness is basically, is this person trustworthy? And there's some metrics around that. So one of the best things about having a good credit score is that you save a lot of money, because the better your credit score, the lower your interest rate, all things being equal. So traditional uses of credit are consumer credit. So, credit cards, loans, you purchase something, a product or a use of a service that you can't pay for immediately. Credit cards, home loans, so mortgages, car, student loans. These are the most traditional uses of credit that we all know and understand and probably have or have had at some point. So like I kind of mentioned, you have to apply for credit. You have to basically ask someone, an institution, or even a person, you can do private loans, to lend you money, and you promise to pay them back. And credit also means your ability to borrow or buy things on a credit contract. So this is just a reframe around credit. I'd like to move away from debt as it relates to the way that it can make us feel, and instead of begin to think about it as credit. So this next slide is really important, very, very important. Credit markets. Okay, so the reason this is important is that we think about debt on the consumer side, right? What we don't necessarily know unless we're working in the industry is that debt, so the credit markets, are the lifeblood of the global financial system. In essence, nothing works without debt. So if you're in that camp of thinking debt is bad, debt is a burden, debt is, those things that we can have around it, well, understand that the whole global economy runs on debt. It is a tool that we're going to get into. And so I offer that because it's really important to understand that it's not a bad thing. So bonds and bank loans form this credit market, which is part of what is overall called the capital markets, capital essentially meaning money. Credit or fixed income market is the market that trades in debt. And bonds, i.e. debt, are the instruments that are used by companies, governments, institutions, businesses to fund economic growth and activities. So they're used to create jobs, to create businesses, and to make investments. And this is staggering. When I first heard this, it really put a lot into perspective for me. But the global credit market is about 3 times the size of the global equity market. So there's more debt, there's 3x more debt than there is equity in the world. So in other words, money doesn't make the world go round. Credit makes the world go round.
And I'm just going to kind of add one thought to that to help you really embody this, hopefully. If you think about what money is, it's an exchange tool. It's meant to be dynamic. It's not a static thing. And in a vacuum, it doesn't even have any reference to anything else by itself. It's just a tool for exchange, which means it's kind of natural for money to be used in flow as opposed to static. Go ahead.
No, definitely. Yeah, that's a really important reframe there, is that static, stagnant money is meant to circulate. So this is a question for reflection. How do you use credit? So are you thinking about credit as like, I'm going into debt? Does that feel heavy? Does it feel burdensome? What are you purchasing with credit? What are you financing with credit? And what are you growing or building with credit? So keep some of that in mind today and in the future as you go through it, because this is how credit is a tool. It can be used for any of these things. How we choose to use it and work with it is entirely up to us. And also, monitoring your credit scores. And, Jennifer mentioned this before, but women are statistically, my apologies, better at repaying debt than men statistically. Alrighty. So next, this is called it order of debt. And the goal here is to think about debt and move from consumption to investment. Now, there's nothing wrong with using credit for consumption. I use credit cards for everything. I have my whole little system where this is basically how I live. I think most people live. But it's important to understand the order of debt. You're moving from revolving consumer debt to installment credit. So that means like a fixed term loan. Student loans are an investment into your future. I put a question mark there. It could be questionable these days. Mortgage loans, you're purchasing an appreciating asset when you're putting a mortgage on a property. Business loans for funding a revenue generating business. Real estate loans, that's my world, where you purchase a building or a cash flowing portfolio of assets and you're using debt to do that. And then there's borrowing against your assets, which is more of an advanced strategy for wealth building. But this is where debt becomes a wealth multiplier when used with prudence. So when we think about debt, you can think about going from consumption to creation and to investment. And then that investment becomes generative and it builds upon itself. And credit can be used to build your wealth. So when we get to that last step, it really becomes about arbitrage on interest rates versus your growth opportunities. So Jennifer, I know maybe you want to give that definition of arbitrage on interest rates. You want to maybe talk about that a little bit.
I would love to. Yeah. And this is the beginning of the paradigm shift in how you really want to be thinking, because we're taught as children, first of all, sort of basics when it comes to money management and with mastery. And what I love about this, Adapia, the way you laid it out, this goes from sort of beginner to expert level. And these are the stages of sophistication where it comes to debt. And really what we're doing here is really encouraging people, especially women, to move from basic level through these stages into intermediate and ideally advanced, because advanced is where basically your money's just working for you. You're not even working for your money anymore, period, full stop. And the beginner one is you're working to pay off your credit card, right? And in between, these are the stages as you start to understand, because really what it is arbitrage on interest rates is starting to think macro, not just, hey, was I a good girl? Did I pay back what I borrowed? Okay. But wait a minute. How did that interest rate serve me? Was that a 27% interest rate? That's ridiculous. My credit score is 790. I won't take anything unless it's a 12% interest rate, even for a massive amount of loan, whatever. You start thinking about that and you start thinking arbitrage about how can you leverage your credit score to refinance into better interest rates, which frees up cash flow. And then eventually you start thinking about, wow, if I have access, say, for example, I have a cash value life insurance policy and I can get a zero net loan out of my cash value. And I have access for a business opportunity where I very validly can anticipate a 17% return, right? I really want to start thinking about the arbitrage just meaning the leverage and the difference between what I stand to gain in one set of debt contract versus another set of debt contract, and which one serves me better. Not who am I serving, but which one's serving me. And arbitrage is really about that. So even into things like you have a student loan. Okay, well, what's the interest rate on that student loan? Some of them are so low that you may as well just let it sit there and keep the liquid available for other things where either you have higher interest rates or better yet, higher opportunity rates. And in fact, some people are strategically not even paying back their student loans because they think there may be forgiveness down the road. But just starting to think in terms of comparison of interest rates and how they stand to benefit you. Okay.
Yeah. Definitely. And one very, very little thing, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but as it comes to interest rate, and especially things like student loans or larger loans in a rising inflationary environment, it's actually more beneficial to pay your loans back later due to what inflation does to the value of a dollar. So just something else to think about. Won't spend a super amount of time on that. So rethinking debt. So debt is a form of capital, and capital, which is raised through equity and debt, can be used to grow businesses, finance investments, for example, in new plants, equipment, technology. It funds infrastructure projects. I think we're all pretty familiar with the fact that all governments borrow to basically do everything that they do. Some governments, like the US government, borrow a lot more than others, but essentially everyone's borrowing to make things happen. And so what happens is we borrow, we put it into motion, it creates jobs, flows money into the economy. And additionally, individuals and businesses can invest in vehicles to generate wealth. So this is how a lot of people use debt. So debt, in other words, is an instrument or a tool for growth used for business, personal, or investment purposes. And with the right use of credit, which is also called debt financing. So again, these terms are really important. So you understand we're always talking about the same thing, but when you start to talk about it as financing, then it starts to maybe sound and land a little differently. So it provides an avenue for faster growth when employed strategically and correctly. So we're going to go through a few different ways of how we can use credit to build wealth. How do businesses use credit? They expand operations, they buy or build assets, they invest in, they use it to invest in or speed up growth. For example, hiring, marketing budgets. So they're scaling. They use debt to stay in business when times are tough. They also use it for cash flow. There's cash flow and budgeting strategies where debt is involved to allow for a company or a business to stay liquid. They use it to retain more equity ownership. So instead of raising capital from outside investors, let's say, a business can take out a loan and pay back interest and not have to give away a piece of their own equity, which is, you want that to be worth more than the interest rate that you pay on a loan. Business credit allows entrepreneurs, organizations, and companies of all sizes to fund and build their businesses, which also fuels economic growth. And just as a quick statistic, across all banks in the US, the average small business loan amount is actually $633,000. And there's all kinds of different loans available to businesses. So businesses use credit to build their businesses and their wealth.
I wanted to share something about this anecdotally that I thought might help a few of the people here. So I founded Quantum in 2012, and it was a complete bootstrap operation. It was literally me and a laptop squatting in the office next door to where I used to work, to be 100% honest. And I bootstrapped year over year based on just what I could generate as growth. And I invested what I could from what I generated myself for years. And I would look at other companies and be confused about how could they afford social media marketing? How could they afford this? How are they growing? Because I was having great growth. I just didn't have enough to invest in all of those things until finally I started realizing the companies that scale the fastest, they virtually never bootstrap. They take some kind of debt so that they can scale faster, because yes, you do need to have a really smoking website. You really do need to have some sort of social media connectivity. You need all of those things to help get your message out there faster. And I guess this is one of those do not as I did, but as I'm teaching you, because if you are starting a business, you can bet on yourself. And you can trust yourself to come through on that, especially if you're a woman and you know what women do. You can allow yourself to take some debt. And I know that that sounds obvious to some, but it isn't always obvious just because we don't think of ourselves as having permission. And so this statistic that the average small business has a loan of $633K really stood out for me, because I know even if at the time I had taken a $50K loan, what I could have done with that in year 2 of my business. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a great example. And I think it also goes back to, can you trust yourself? Like, I think this is really what it is. Do you trust yourself? And I come at everything I do with credit from that perspective. Can I trust myself? So we'll talk about how investors use credit to build wealth. So they will borrow money to put it into investments. So any kind of, I mean, you could do it into equities as well, but assets, real estate, stocks, gold. So you borrow at a lower rate than what you're expecting to make on that rate of return. So it's called a spread. And it works when you have cash flow and reserves to cover interest payments. So there's varying degrees of risk here with borrowing to invest. So this comes to planning and like really understanding cash flow and budgets and projections. It's not that hard to do. It might sound like it, but trust me, I am not the math whiz in the room. But when I can put things down on paper or in Excel and look at it, it really helps to ground the concept and helps me to see that, yes, I can do this. So borrowing to invest is a very powerful wealth building tool, especially when the money is put into cash flowing assets that also grow in underlying value. So for me, that is real estate for the most part. So if you're buying a real estate asset, it's going to be paying you rents. So that basically covers the interest payments. So that's a way to think about it. If you don't have underlying cash flows from your investment, then you need to have reserves, or you have money coming in from other places to cover it. So you're essentially just thinking, I'm going to borrow money, I'm going to put it over here, it's going to grow faster than what I'm paying for over here. As long as I can cover my payments and pay it back, then I'm in a net gaining position. And this is what investors do all the time. Some investors will also borrow against their existing assets to make more investments. And so they use their own asset as a security for the lender. In stocks, there's also margin trading, super high risk. It's definitely not something that I do. I'm not a stock trader, but it can be very lucrative. But it also can come with a lot of risk. So this is definitely a more advanced strategy. One of the best things, though, and I'm going to speak from a real estate perspective, if you own real estate assets, and you don't want to sell them, you can borrow against the equity and then use that equity to go buy more. And then you have rents that are covering the mortgage payments. So what's great about that is you don't have to sell your assets, so you don't also trigger any kind of capital gains tax. So this is a strategy that's used a lot in real estate, where people don't sell the asset. They just add debt to the asset that can be serviced by rents. And then they go build and build and build and build and build and kind of always never pay tax. A lot of very wealthy people do the same thing with their stock portfolio. They borrow against it, and then they reinvest it. So this is a strategy used by the wealthiest of investors, Wall Street, banks, et cetera. So I was kind of speaking to this a little bit, but this is how real estate investors use credit as well. So just in general, pretty much most real estate is purchased with debt. Nobody really buys real estate all cash, or like keeps it in all cash. You can do, but there's pretty much always debt. And what's great about it is that by putting debt on your assets, you don't need as much capital up front, which is, at a minimum 6 figures. So unless you have that kind of cash, the debt allows you to not need so much down. It can also spread what you do have across multiple properties. So you increase your diversification and you increase your cash flow. Interest rates play a very key role in assessing risk and returns when you're doing this. The interest rates are going to be important when it comes to the repayment on the asset. Cash flows from rent pay the borrowing costs and other costs, and leverage. So when you take out debt, it's called leverage. It increases the return on invested capital, which we'll go into in a second. And so by refinancing that asset, we're using in-place equity to buy more real estate without selling existing assets. So taking out your equity, and you can do this on your home as well with a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. So where you're unlocking equity value into usually a lower, like a low rate revolving line of credit that you can use to fund purchases. A lot of people use HELOCs for home renovation, which is generally what they're meant for. Definitely don't want to be using your HELOC to buy clothes, let's just say. And so when we're taking out equity as debt, right, we're tapping our own equity against these assets. It allows investors to grow their holdings and wealth more quickly. So debt, in short, allows you to scale. So let's just do a quick illustration of what I mean, and what I mean by leverage, and what I mean by the statement where leverage increases the return on invested capital. So say, and these are all hypothetical numbers. So say, for example, you're purchasing a $100,000 property. If you're going all cash, you'll put $100,000 down. And let's say you have $300 a month in tax, insurance, kind of utility expenses, and you get $1,000 a month in rent, you're going to net cash flow $700. Okay, so you're getting $700 a month. On a leveraged purchase, you're only putting $20,000 down. You have $300 a month in tax, insurance, et cetera. And then let's say hypothetically, this is based on a 5% interest rate. It's a $430 a month mortgage payment. With $1,000 a month rent, your net cash flow is $270. So you might be looking at this and saying, well, I make more money because I'm getting $700 a month versus $270. But here's the thing. In real estate, it's not about the return on the value of the asset. It's about the return on the money you put in. So here's what I mean. Cash on cash is the equation that we use. It's really about what is your money that you put down out of your pocket doing for you. So cash on cash basically means your annual net income divided by the money you put in, your capital invested. So here on the left in the all cash purchase with our $100,000 down payment, our $700 a month. So we're making $8,400 a year in rents. And if you divide that by 100,000, which is the cash you put in, that's an 8.4% cash on cash return, which is a great return. Now, on the right, we're looking at the leveraged purchase, and we're looking at the return on our $20,000 down payment. So if we take the 270, which was the net income after expenses that we saw on the previous slide, that's $3,240 a year. But you divide that by $20,000 because that's the cash you put down. And that's a 16.2% cash on cash return. So your return on your money when it's leveraged in this example is double than just putting in cash. This is what leverage can do when it's used appropriately. Now, just a disclaimer here, these numbers can go all kinds of ways depending on what the numbers actually are. So if you if your debt is much higher, I mean, you can go under. It doesn't always work out like this, but the concept is always this. The concept is always if you put less money down, that you use leverage, you get leveraged returns. So this is how leverage works.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I saw that slide, it blew my mind because even I think about arbitrage, I think about leverage, but I never thought about this ever, the way you broke it down. And I think it's so encouraging too, because a lot of times, most of us, I would say, not all of us, because I know there's some very sophisticated investors on this, even just attending today. But I know a lot of us think, well, in order to participate, for example, in a real estate play, I need to come up with enough to buy a whole house on my own, right? And then it's like that. It'll be 10, 20 years before I can even gather the money, et cetera, to do that. And 20 years have gone by of the time value on our money. But understanding that I don't even need to come up with all the money myself. I have to come up with enough just to be able to borrow the rest at an interest rate, let's say, of 5%. Because if my return can be 16%, I'm still going to come out with a ton of profit on that. It blew my mind the way you broke it down. And I appreciate you so much for doing that, because I think it's hopefully going to really help elucidate for a lot of people, and they can step into opportunity. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, it always helps to look at the numbers, right? Like there's so many numbers that we could run. And of course there's ways that these numbers don't work, that they don't work out. But in general, we, it's like, look at run the numbers, run the numbers. It's always important. We run the numbers in our businesses. We run the numbers in our household budget. Like when we run the numbers on our investments, it helps us make better decisions.
I see a question about how can things go wrong. I think we'll definitely dive into that. I think we'll do that.
Yes.
We'll start the Q&A at the end, and we'll start with that question. So great
For
question.
Sure.
Thank you.
For sure. So speaking of which, Jennifer, I'll let you take the next couple slides here about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great idea, right? When we're stepping into a risk, because another thing about women, okay, women are better with money, statistically speaking, than men. They're more responsible with money than men. They blow men out of the water. No offense to any other men who are here, because we also love you, but they tend to be really great with money on every marker except for two. And that is that they will not have enough confidence, and they will fear risk to a fault. I can't tell you how many clients I have who will come to me and say, well, I have $200,000 or $500,000 because I inherited it, or it's my rainy day fund, and it's just sitting in an interest account bearing 0 interest right now. And that's because they're afraid and they crave security. We tend to crave security, many of us. And unfortunately, what we think is keeping us safe is often keeping us down. And so just knowing all that, knowing it's not just you, that this is really natural and common among women, we really want to help people leverage out of that fear. And so the best way to address it is, what are the natural fears? Well, what if I can't cover the loan mortgage? What if the money runs dry? What if I can't do it? Yes, it's a natural concern and fear. There are, of course, risk management products you can use to make sure that even if, God forbid, a person was hurt, they would be able to come up with the income, because there's disability insurance replacement or life insurance replacements, or products that can make sure they cover both. I mean, it's a natural fear, but it doesn't mean you should stay stuck for that reason, because there are ways around all of these. Rising interest rates, another natural fear. Interest rates are rising. Okay. At the same time, if you're using loans where the rates are fixed, that becomes less of a concern. And that's why it's really good often to avoid variable loan rates, but we can talk about that. Another fear is becoming over leveraged and being unable to manage investments. I would say that's a very healthy fear. Live with that fear. That's what's going to make you discern. And when you make your choices, that healthy fear will keep you safe. Just don't let it freeze you. Don't let it make you stuck, because that's less safe. Losing the underlying assets. Yeah, sure. Again, there are a lot of insurance products that can help against risks like that. And a lot of the due diligence when it goes into how you're choosing what to put your money into, that is on you. And research and critical thinking and some common sense, all of that helps you determine what you think are the risks of losing the underlying assets and making discerning decisions. And also the fear that you invested in something, but it actually didn't grow the way you thought, or it even goes down. Okay. Again, a healthy, natural fear, but just don't let it freeze you. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, for those of us that want to start shifting how we look at things, you don't have to go from 0 to 60. There is a gamut of opportunities for putting your money to work for you. Some are extremely risk averse. They have baseline guarantees, etc. They don't have as much upside because you pay for the guarantees and the safety. And then there's also, for those who want to get more aggressive, there's, a total extreme on the other end. And you don't have to just go at the pace that you think you have to. You can pick through education the products that match where you're ready, and then build your confidence step by step and move into being tolerant of a little bit more risk over time, because you come through for yourself and you prove to yourself, oh yeah, I came through for myself. Now I can manage to take a bet on myself, a bigger one. Okay. Oh, so I guess on the same themes, just don't let the fear cloud the ability to make plans and do something. Staying stuck is worse than anything. I mean, first of all, we have to remember that interest rates right now being 7.5%, those people who have their money under a mattress or in a zero interest bearing account, they're actually robbing themselves of like 6 or 7% interest. They're losing 6% of their money every minute just by thinking they're keeping it safe as opposed to leveraging it. So you're not as safe as you think when you just stand like a deer in headlights with this. But there are things you can do. For example, make sure you have some reserves, build a nest egg. Make sure if you can, you get fixed rates because the variable rates can really get you. Like I said, it's okay to start small and build confidence. Start with some little baby risk and then come through for yourself. And cash flow is critical. So Adipia is the master of teaching people how to create products that even in the very short term will provide you cash flow returns on the investment. And that is really great because if you have to lock all the money up for say 20 years before you're getting any of it back, okay, which is essentially what you do with your 401k, that's not serving you right now. You need to have, we talked about diversification last month. You need to have some that are super long. Yes, they're there for 20, 30 years, and then you're going to pull them out. But you need some growth in the meantime, too. So you want to be looking at some investment opportunities where they're going to start generating cash back to you in the next 2 years, and maybe even sometimes in the next 18 months, in the next 3 to 5 years. That is really important. And there are tools for that. There are lots and lots and lots of cool financial tools out there.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely. So I'm going to use some examples. This is me personally. Like there's different ways that you can use credit for your cash flow planning. I love my line of credit. I must say it is like my favorite. It's like my favorite tool. But in general, there's using lower interest rates, using lower interest rate credit to fund purchases and investment. So for example, these are two of my personal examples. I use my line of credit to pre-fund certain purchases. So I will buy. So for example, and those purchases for me are like home renovation, or just like really large purchases. I like to use my line of credit for assets, valuable things like home renovations. I also use it for investments. But basically what I do, let's say I'm thinking about my home renovation, like even with the rising cost of everything, right? I'm like, let's do this project. It's going to cost $10,000. So maybe I had $10,000 set aside for it, but it actually turned out to be $20,000. That happens a lot, but I will make my purchases on the credit card because I like my rewards. I like my Amazon cash back. I like my rewards. I use the line of credit to pay off the credit card. And then I pay my line of credit down over time. So I'm still paying interest, but I'm paying way less than on a credit card that, it's running about 30%. My line of credit runs 3%. So if I didn't pay off my credit card every month, I would never get out of debt. Like it's just ever. And this is literally what happens is we can't get out of debt because we can't pay off this egregious, daily interest compounding credit. Credit cards are very dangerous if you don't know how to use them. So I use my line of credit to pay off my credit card for large purchases. Then, of course, I have my monthly budgets. Next month, we're going to talk about, in 2 months, we're going to talk about budgets and buckets. So that's how I use my line of credit to add value to my home or to buy assets. The other way I use my line of credit is as a bridge. So I'm my own bridge. So for example, if I'm going to put money into an investment, let's just use easy round numbers, like $100,000 into a syndication. And that syndication closes at the end of this month. I don't have $100,000 in cash right now, but I know that 2, 4, 6 months from now, I'm going to have that money because it's coming back to me from other investments. Right? Something else closes out and I'm going to get that money. So I essentially bridge myself with the line of credit. I put it in from the line of credit. I make the investment 2, 4, 6 months down the road. That 100,000 comes back to me. I can use it to pay off the line of credit. And this is that arbitrage because it allows me to invest now into something that in my world is returning 40 to 50% in a 3 or 4 year time horizon, right? So my 100,000 will be, call it 150,000 in 3 years. So is it worth me paying a couple, even if it's 2,000, that's a lot, but let's say $2,000 in interest to do that? To me, it is. To me, it is. And even if I never paid off for those 2 to 3 years, that $100,000 on my line of credit, which just doesn't happen with me, and it cost me $10,000 in interest, is it worth the $50,000 that I made? For me, it is, because I'm comfortable doing this. But what I normally do is I take that incoming money and I'll pay it off, and I keep revolving my line of credit to pre-fund investment purchases. So those are two different ways that I use my line of credit. And in essence, knowing how to use credit as a tool for creating equity, value, and opportunities enhances your portfolios, and it grows wealth.
Yeah, I'm just going to add, it's a little bit the concept of being your own bank. Definitely. Even though you are going to use a bank probably, or some other good resource for your credit. Okay. So one quick tip is try to get a line of credit anytime if you can before you need one. When your financials are really good and you don't need money is the only time to really get a line of credit. Not because you need it, but just because you don't need it is the best time to apply for a line of credit. And another thing is, if your banking relationship is anonymous, like if it's Chase Bank, by the way, which is where I was when I first started my business, they don't really give a hoot about most of their customers in the sense that they'll never give any kind of special consideration or treatment. Okay. Because you're just not big enough. No one is big enough for that bank to really care. But there are banks where they want to compete and they will give you special attention. They'll give you a personal touch. You can shop your banking relationship, which was something I had never even thought about before. And sometimes going to a credit union or a local bank or looking through alumni associations or wherever else to get better banking relationships where they kind of give a hoot about you, where they'll see you as a unique person as opposed to just a number or just one more anonymous statistic, can be the major difference in terms of brass tacks access to the kind of arbitrage we're talking about. Like at my first bank, I could only get a $10,000 line of credit and the interest rate on it was ridiculous, even though my company at that point was generating way more than that. And I didn't even need the line of credit. I was doing it just because I wanted it before I needed it. I went to a new bank and I was able to increase the amount of the line of credit, increase the fees associated with carrying it, et cetera. And that little shift alone began my journey into arbitrage and other things and leverage, and actually is probably the fundament of why Adipia and I formed WOW, because that aha moment of how important it is just to have a better bank relationship and how few people talk about that, especially for women, made me really want to make sure we all start thinking more about these kinds of things.
Yeah. And we have a whole session on that, I think in a few months, the whole banking relationship. So we're going to get into that a lot. So actually, Jennifer, do you want to take the slide?
Yes. So the whole concept of being your own bank, right? Think about where you have money that you might have access to yourself without really having to go elsewhere. So just like Adipia is thinking about the fact that she's got a line of credit where she can borrow money at 3%, so she can run it through her credit card for points and then pay that 27% interest rate off with her 3% loan and then pay herself back at 3%, which is masterful. And I love and I appreciate that example. There are other places where people are really sitting on money they don't realize. So this happens a lot with clients that I'm helping. People are over contributing sometimes to their 401ks because we're all taught, save for the future, put it into your 401k, which is of course valid. I'm not knocking 401ks, but think about this. Often your employer only matches up to a certain amount. Many companies, it's only 3% or 4% or maybe 5%. Now, some companies will get 7%, which is really great. But some people are putting 15% into their 401k. Now, the amount being matched by your employer is free money. So yes, you match up to, you contribute up to that match because there's nothing better than free money, right? Doubling your money for free. You can't beat that anywhere. So if they match 4%, for sure, contribute 4% at least. But if you're contributing 15% into your 401k and your 401k has no guarantees, it could go up. It can just as easily go down. Even if you're allocated across stocks and bonds and you tell them that your risk profile is moderate and that you hope to retire in 2035, there's literally nothing they can do that's going to guarantee your money will continue to be up or that it will happen to be up the year you're looking to draw out your retirement. There's nothing they can do. The stock market doesn't work that way. So think about the arbitrage there and potentially draw back from 15% in your 401k at 5, 6%, 7%, especially now as the stock market, that's a whole thing. I don't want to get into that, but just think about where else could that 8% you're contributing into your 401k work for you? Could you put it into syndicated real estate where returns are sometimes 20, 40%? With some guarantees, or could you put it into certain products that have minimum guarantees and then upside potential? Maybe. So you could be sitting on money you don't even realize just because you're over contributing into the one tool everybody's taught to use that isn't necessarily even the best financial tool in the financial world. It's just the most easily accessed one. Okay. Again, cash value life insurance policies, they have zero net cost loans, even in those. So there are structures you can set up where you know that you're going to have access to cash. And then if and when you want to be your own bank, you borrow it out. You're borrowing it out tax-free. The growth inside of it is tax-free. And the loan rates on those cash value products can be super competitive, 0%, 1%, 2%. And especially as interest rates continue to rise, that can be another place that you can start building and funding so that you're going to have lots of choices besides just your 401k. And then another thing is your accounting. So going back to that good girl thing and the good boy thing, it's not just women. Some people, and not everybody, but some people are just using whoever they can find as their accountant. But if you're in business for yourself or investing, you may have access to significant tax deductions if you get a savvy accountant. And while that may cost a little bit more, like my accountants definitely cost a little bit more than H&R Block, but if they're savvy and they're up to date, they can help you leverage so you pay less of your income to taxes and reserve more of it for investing for you. And that is really about someone who knows what they're doing, because we can't keep up with all the tax rules ourselves. But finding a really good preparer who's savvy and strategic can be worth the money. And that's, again, when you're just filing a basic tax return and not learning about any of this, sometimes you're just leaving money on the table that could actually be yours to keep. And one last example, there's just simple things like there's things called HSA health plans. They're high deductible health plans, and you can put up to $8,000 a year tax-free into those. And the money's tax-free growing in there. It's tax-free when you want to use it. And then when you turn 65, you can use it for something besides even just health expenses. They're little things that people just don't learn about, don't know about. And so learning about all these things, get kind of intrigued, nerd out a little bit, because it's all the different ways you can start finding money that you didn't even know was there already before you even have to look at borrowing from someone other than yourself, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. No, those are all really great examples, because that cash flow is important, because that's how you're paying back the loans. So there's all these different tools, and everything kind of, it goes together like a puzzle. So we're running short on time. So we've only got a couple more slides here. So in short, is debt bad? Well, no, and it depends. So you can be a slave to the mechanics of debt, where you're just, you have these like credit cards and they're always run up and you're paying so much interest and you don't feel like you're ever paying it off, because you're not, because they're not meant to be, because the interest rate is so high. And you're just loan after loan after loan, because there's not an understanding of some of the tools that we can use. So, yes, debt can be bad. Definitely. There's a lot of risk to debt. Or you can use debt as an instrument and as a tool for wealth. So it's all about how you approach and frame it. So let's talk about, what should I do? Okay. How debt can be harmful. So Stephanie McCullough, you asked, like, there's definitely some risks to using debt, which is why it must be used strategically. And there's lots of ways that that can be harmful. So high interest rates, like I said, not paying off credit card balances, using credit cards unnecessarily, like really watching your spending on credit cards, an unwillingness to look at it. That I've done that for sure in the past, where I know I've been a bad girl and I've spent way too much and I don't want to look at my credit card, but I have to. These are really important things. And there's no shame in it, by the way. Like, just, we have to have so much compassion around this. Some other ways that debt can be harmful: not understanding the terms. How does the interest rate work? Is it variable? Is it fixed? How does it compound? What's the repayment schedule? Do I have prepayment penalties? So like, there's a lot of things that can be harmful if we don't understand them. They're not harmful in and of themselves. They can hurt us if we don't understand how they work, because we're working with math. It doesn't have an opinion. It has a formula. And so if we don't understand how that math works, then that's how we get hurt. Another way, which is more in our power also, is not negotiating better rates, whether not negotiating and also not refinancing, because we can refinance student loans and mortgages, especially when interest rates are going down, which is not now. Interest rates are starting to go up because of inflation. So when they do go down, that's a really good time because you save money. Also, if you pay down your loans too soon or at the wrong time in an economic cycle, it doesn't necessarily harm us, but it doesn't help us get ahead. Being afraid of debt, that can be harmful. Over leveraging, so taking out too many loans, can definitely be harmful, because that's how we never get out of debt, or how we lose assets. So that's a risk. And not having sufficient cash flow to cover interest and loan payments can be harmful. This is how banks take our assets, or how we end up in bankruptcy. So debt is a tool. It's a sword. It can harm as well. So, but it's up to us to use it as a tool. And so it's important to know that everyone has different risk tolerances. So that definition of over leveraging can be very different for different people. And there are products and tools with guarantees for those who are more risk averse. But as Jennifer said a few times, stagnation is the biggest risk. And so how do we use debt strategically? So paying off high interest credit balances every month. Cash flow planning and budgeting allows us to use debt as a tool instead of that being obligated, that feeling of being under debt. Making strategic purchases with debt, interest rate arbitrage. Debt can strategically be used to grow an investment portfolio or buying assets. Establishing and using lines of credit, that's a strategic use of debt. Borrowing against your assets as well. And reviewing your results regularly, at least quarterly for sure. So how are you using your debt? How much interest are you actually paying? Like, really looking at those statements, like even on something like a line of credit, you still pay interest and you still have to pay it off monthly. So all of this is really, really important. And money is an energy in motion. So keep an eye on it. It's like everything is circular. It circulates. We can use money to grow things, or we can actually use money to dig ourselves into a hole. So this is all about how we use everything, including debt. So with that, this is just our last slide about Women of Wow.